Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a fantasy movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Orc Wars. Now before I get into this movie review, I want to talk briefly about another movie that came out in 2011 simply called Orcs. Now before I watched Orc Wars, I thought this may be a sequel to that original film Orcs. And it does appear that it does have some of the creative team behind that movie that have actually made this Orc Wars movie as well. Although it doesn't actually appear to be a sequel. If anything, it actually appears to be more of a remake. Now the story here is simply we have a character called John Norton, who is an ex-Marine who is kind of haunted by the events that that took place in Afghanistan or wherever, and he kind of wants to get away from people, so he buys the most remotest sort of place he can buy, which is out in the desert somewhere. Unbeknownst to him, this actually happens to be near a portal to a kind of like fantasy type dimension. And in this portal, a kind of elven princess escapes into our dimension to escape this kind of hordes of orcs. Now, as it turns out, the property that he's bought actually belonged to a kind of guardian of the realms, and he's been kind of taking care of this portal and ultimately defending it against oncoming forces for a great many times. And unfortunately, he's passed away, so it turns to John Norton to become the new sentinel, which is the kind of the guardian, if you like, of this sort of portal. And he sort of first encounters the sort of princess and the orcs, and obviously, first of all, he doesn't quite believe what's going on in quite an amusing scene. And basically, it turns out that he has to ultimately protect this princess, who is kind of being wanted for this sort of blood sacrifice with this kind of evil witch in the fantasy dimension, who is kind of floating above the ground and is sort of seemingly in control of all the orcs. And she's pretty effective, I have to say. She looks pretty decent. And they kind of want her to sort of ultimately sacrifice her to fulfill some sort of prophecy where they can open all the gates to all these different worlds and take over them and whatnot. So it falls to John Norton and a couple of other sort of people who he sort of ends up picking along the way to defend the princess and our realm against wave after wave of orcs, and ultimately their kind of ultimate weapon, which is a honking big dragon as well. So, what's the film like? So this film was actually, I believe, financed at least partially from Kickstarter, a relatively low budget. Now, if you've seen the original Orcs film, one of the sort of things I said about that movie, it does the effects of the orcs themselves are straight out of the Lord of the Rings films, and it's very true of this film. I would imagine if it is the same production company and the same people behind this film, they've obviously reused a lot of the props. However, this film is far more ambitious than the original Orcs movie. Now, in the original Orcs film, we barely ever see the kind of faces of the orcs. They've always got the kind of armour. And when I say armour, I'm talking about the exact same plate armour that you've seen in Lord of the Rings. But anyway, in this movie, you actually see a lot more of the faces of the orcs, and the makeup's obviously a lot better. And, things have obviously improved significantly from the original Orcs movie. The acting is a lot better too. There are a couple of cast members that do return from the original Orcs films, although they're really just cameos, to be honest with you. They're playing sort of different characters anyway. This is what I'm saying, it's not really a sequel. The main sort of characters, they do a passable job, I've got to say. It does amuse me. So John Norton's reactions to when he sort of first sees Orcs, I think it's actually quite priceless, to be honest. Although I do think maybe he doesn't react afterwards when he sort of understands what they actually are, maybe like a normal human would do, but that's probably more of a script issue than anything else. So it's essentially kind of an action movie where you've got this kind of ragtag sort of group of human survivors defending wave after wave after orcs. Very similar to the first original Orcs movie. This is what I'm saying, it's almost more of a remake. If I've got to pick a couple of holes in this film, there's a few things I would say about it. So a couple of minor things first of all. The sound effects I don't think are very good, specifically the gun sound effects. And actually, they kind of use very fake-looking muzzle flashes as well. But the gun sound effects I don't think are very good. They kind of sound kind of fake to me or something. However, I do have a couple of issues maybe with the script. The first one, at no point does John Norton try to call for help from any type of authorities, which I think they should have addressed. You could have had some excuse, why you wouldn't sort of call the police or anything like this if your kind of land would get invaded by, even if you didn't believe they were orcs, you would simply call the police. So you got a load of people shooting arrows in your property and things like that, you would call the police. At no point does that happen in this movie, which I think was a mistake and it should have been addressed. And the other issue that I have with this movie, and this is going to be mildly spoilerish, not too spoilerish, is that the orcs just seem way too easy to kill to be. fighting these orcs is literally like shooting fish in a barrel. And it's so much so that I actually started to feel sorry for the orcs. Now, one of the amusing things about this movie is that the orcs don't understand sort of modern technology, and they actually think that John Norton is a wizard because he's using guns and stuff. And they just assume that it's magic, and they simply don't understand what's happening, which, you know, I think, you know, it's a fairly good point. However, they just seem to kind of line up and just get shot and just mown down by these guns and things like that. And at no real point do you actually think, man, you know, the kind of, it's really a hard fight, because they just seem to get their asses kicked every single time, apart from kind of one orc who is kind of, I guess, the main sort of orc character, who does seem a little bit more sort of intelligent than the others. The end fight scene, ultimately, they end up having a kind of half track versus a dragon, which is, you know, and the actual dragon effects when it's flying around and stuff are actually pretty decent, I have to say, and actually probably better than some of the effects that I've seen in the kind of these fantasy films that are slightly higher budget. I believe the budget on this one was $1.5 million. I'm, you know, not 100% sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what the budget was. But the actual dragon effects do look pretty good. There's a couple of shots where you sort of see it close up, it doesn't look quite as good. But when it's sort of flying around and stuff, I have to say, oh, you know, I was quite impressed with that. I thought the stunt work was excellent here. Really sort of fantastic, sort of, you know, people and orcs sort of flying off everywhere, and the actual sort of hand-to-hand sort of fight scenes that we see are very well choreographed and very well filmed as well. So good job on that. I mean, it's vastly improved over the original Orcs movie, you know, tenfold. As I said, there's a couple of problems with the script that I think, you know, that were kind of should have been addressed. But overall, that's really the only sort of issues I have with it, apart from just a couple of minor ones here and there that are kind of maybe a little bit nitpicky, if anything else. I thought that the design of the film looked great. You know, it's professionally made. Really enjoyed it. I have to say, it's a fun movie. You know, I would definitely watch this film again, and I'd be definitely interested in watching sort of further movies made by this sort of creative team. I mean, hopefully, I've seen a great improvement from this film, from the original Orcs movie, and hopefully we'll kind of see that continue. But if you're a fantasy movie fan, I would really check this film out. It's a lot of fun, and it's a very exciting movie with a few minor issues. Not flawless, but I'm going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Well worth checking out. Let me know what your thoughts are if you've seen it. Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.